Hi everyone, and welcome to another video. As requested in a previous video, today I'll be talking about language learning. Yes, I know this is an art channel. Yes, I know most people would advise sticking to your niche to gain popularity on YouTube, blah blah blah. Well, guess what? I like to draw and I like to learn languages, so yeah, that's what you get. That's what I'll be talking about today. In this video, I'll be giving you 5 tips that I think are the most important to learn any language. And no, the tips will not be buying this textbook or that textbook. Not into that really. But before I get into the bulk of the video, I do want to make one thing clear. You, whoever you are watching this video, whoever you are, regardless of your age, your life experience, whatever, are entirely capable of learning a new language. There's this little thing called the critical period hypothesis, which basically states that when people are over a certain age, they're not really able to achieve native-like fluency, and that age is when your brain is still developing as a child. I can't even tell you the number of times someone has said that they'll never be good at whatever language because they're an adult and just don't have the mind for it. Don't get me wrong, it's obviously way easier to learn a second or a third language when you're a kid, but that doesn't mean that it's not impossible to do so and even reach native level fluency as an adult. So get rid of the critical period hypothesis, get rid of that stigma. If you're asking me, I do think that the critical period hypothesis is kind of BS, and what really matters is your own motivation and willingness to learn. So all that being said, I hope you're ready. Let's learn a language. So first, I feel that I should legitimize myself a little bit so that when I make claims like the critical period is BS, you have at least some reason to believe me. So I'm 22 years old and trilingual, which feels like a very arrogant thing to say, but here's a free tip. Having confidence in yourself, even if you're not completely sure of your abilities, is pretty important with language learning. You just gotta full send, believe you're the best, and move on with your life. My native language is English, and I took Spanish from 6th grade to my sophomore year of university. So for you non-Americans out there who are like, what the hell is a sophomore? That's like ages 12 to 20. In my last year of high school, which is before university, I took the Spanish language advanced placement test or AP test and earned a 5, which is the highest score. So I technically have a seal of biliteracy, whatever that means. If y'all are interested in that, I have that. When I got to university, my initial plan was to double major or minor in Spanish and something else, but honestly, I felt I would benefit more from learning another language, so I started taking Japanese classes, which ended up being my second major. I got so lost in the sauce with Japanese. I just graduated this past summer, and in those 4 years, I've passed the N2 rating of the Japanese level placement test, JLPT. It's called JLPT, which is the second highest level, so I'm business proficient, as they say. I could work in Japan if I wanted to. To be honest, since I've been grinding Japanese for the last couple years, I'm not super confident in my Spanish at the moment, but even after not practicing much, I'm still capable of reading novels and chatting with Uber drivers, so I'm sure all that my Spanish really needs is some brushing up. Now, all of this sounds like you really need to go to school or take classes in order to become fluent in a language, and let me tell you, that is not the case. I could not say it more clear. That is just not the case. If you've ever taken any kind of language in school, you'll know that most people, it doesn't matter how many classes they've taken, they can't do much more than a self-introduction after years. And that really comes down to a couple of things. That main one being that, obviously, you actually have to want to learn a language to become better at learning a language. I know, it's crazy, but a lot of people are just in language classes in lower education because they have to, it's a requirement. Of course, classes do benefit those who are motivated learners, less so students who are just there to fulfill a requirement, as I said. So I benefited from classes, but it's not the only way to learn. And it's not the way, honestly, I would recommend learning a language if I had to do it again. So, the 5 tips in this video will not be about taking classes or buying textbooks, no, or any of the standard ways that you might think of learning a language. I know it's a crazy concept, but learning a language can actually be fun, and hopefully it will be with these tips. Alright, so on to tip 1. My first tip is probably an obvious one, but it has to be said. set achievable goals. Huge emphasis on achievable. And no, I want to be fluent does not count as a realistic goal because there's a lot of wiggle room for what fluent can actually mean. For example, I'm very capable of conversing with basically anyone in Japanese, casual professional settings, but would I be able to defend myself in a court of law? Would I be able to describe how photosynthesis works? No, probably not, because I just don't have that vocab, and honestly, I don't think I'll ever need it. I don't want to learn it. Hopefully I never will. Does that mean that technically I'm not fluent? I guess so, but would not being fluent in that particular sense of the word really change my life or be an obstacle in any way? No, it wouldn't. So, a better goal in this case would be something like, I'd like to be able to converse in everyday settings and be able to live an everyday life in the country of my target language. Now that's a big goal. A goal that is probably really hard to imagine when you're just starting out learning a language. You only know how to say, hello, my name is, and good morning and good afternoon, things like that. So you can keep that goal in the back of your mind, but in the interim, you start setting stepping stone goals. That was a mouthful. Stepping stone goals, which are what I call smaller goals that will eventually lead to your bigger goal. By the way, most of my examples in this video will be related to Japanese, but I'll do my best to throw up resources for Spanish on the screen as well. Also Norwegian, since that's kind of my current language learning project. So in the case of Japanese, one of my first goals was to be able to read a chapter of a children's manga that I read in English when I was growing up. It's called Yotsuba. I'll post a video of me flipping through the manga right now. A goal like that is good for a lot of reasons. It's an enjoyable task, since I'm reading manga, and who doesn't love that? It's doable, since the manga is marketed towards kids, so it's pretty standard language, very simple, and in the case of Japanese, it has a lot less kanji than what you would consider normal. And in the case of manga, you can use the English version to cross-reference your understanding of the Japanese if you can get a hold of both copies. Another goal I had was to be able to watch anime without subtitles. Not like any anime, but simpler ones like romance or slice of life that have more general topics and vocabulary. Admittedly, this is a harder goal to achieve since it requires a certain level of listening comprehension, but the fact that there's visuals and the character's tone of voice, and obviously expressions, really helps with the understanding, so it is a step above learning to read children's manga, but not quite on the level of wanting to be fluent in the everyday sense of the word. Of course, with a goal like this, which can really work for any TV show, by the way, the goal is not, I repeat, not to dissect every piece of dialogue and pause every 10 seconds to rewind because you couldn't understand some of the words. That's not fun. We don't like to do that. This method of language learning is supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to be fun, okay? You just input a lot, and whatever you sponge up is good, and if you don't get everything, you move on. So it's supposed to be enjoyable. We're not gonna pause the video every 10 seconds. Instead, pick a percentage, let's say 20%, and say, if I understand 20% of this video or this episode, then it's a win. And remind yourself that there was a time that you understood 0%. Even just recognizing patterns is important. Maybe there's a word you keep hearing the characters use, so you get the sense that it's an important word, even if you don't know the meaning. That's still helpful. That's a good example of when you'd want to look it up later, but not during. Just watch the whole thing and move on. Maybe from context you learn the words yes and no or something like that. I'm sort of edging into the territory of tip 2. Oh my god, that sounded so bad. So I'll just leave it there. That's tip 1, set achievable goals. A big overall goal that you keep in the back of your mind, and stepping stone goals that you use to eventually get to that big goal. My second tip is my favorite one because it's essentially just an excuse to consume wild amounts of media. Tip 2 is to surround yourself in content that interests you in your target language. Legitimate immersion is all well and good, but who really has the time or money to just move to a foreign country and learn that way right off the bat? A lot of people don't. You have to learn the way a child learns, that's true. And when a baby learns a language, they're essentially surrounded by all these stimuli all the time that they don't understand until they pick it up over time. Media is a really good way to simulate that when you can't just move to somewhere else and learn the language. Listen to music, play video games, read children's books, and eventually novels, watch TV or YouTube, anything that you can input into your brain in the target language, do. But also you should enjoy it, because if you don't enjoy it, then you're not going to want to keep doing it. Throughout this section, I'll be putting up my recommendations for video games, TV, YouTube, books, podcasts, etc. that I really enjoy in the languages I've learned. But yeah, pretty much any media that you like that exists in your target language is a really good fit for this tip. It's very broad. I would really recommend that, at least for TV and books, whatever media you choose should be originally created in your target language. This is because I think that culture is intrinsically tied to language, so you can get a lot out of, say, Mexican media made by Mexican people, because you're going to come across a lot of references that probably wouldn't be present if you'd watch, say, a British TV show with Spanish subtitles on, something like that. It's just not going to be exactly the same. Unless they're British Mexican, then obviously that's different. You likely chose to learn a new language for a reason, so the more you're able to interact with that language's culture or country/countries, the better, and media is a really good way to do that. Now, just like I was saying about anime earlier, you're not going to understand most of what you're trying to absorb at first. In fact, you might understand next to nothing, still okay. You have to be nice to yourself at the beginning stages of learning languages. Like 1 word out of 3 sentences, that's okay. That's part of the reason why I highly recommend you choose media you're genuinely interested in, because otherwise you're just going to get frustrated and not want to continue. So I can imagine for me personally, I'm not really into like architecture, and if I picked up a video on the architecture of Mexico City and didn't know that much Spanish, I would maybe not be into it that much. But if it was like comedy or something, maybe I'd be into it more, because even if you can't tell what they're saying, it's still like kind of funny because they're laughing and then you're laughing, things like that. So if it's something you love, you're more motivated to interact with it, even when things get difficult, then you're more likely to establish the habit of interacting with your target language wherever possible. As I said, learning language like this takes motivation, and it's not going to be easy. But would you rather sit in class for 45 minutes a day and learn about past tense verb conjugations, or would you like to watch Naruto? Yeah, that's what I thought. Quick side note on that, I'm not saying that you shouldn't ever pick up a textbook when you're starting, especially when you're starting to learn a language. Unless you're a genius, it's likely going to be kind of a helpful and maybe a slightly unfortunate resource to form foundational knowledge of grammar and sentence structure. What I'm saying is that your learning doesn't have to be all textbook work, or even primarily textbook work. Think of it as a resource that you can use to look up a phrase that you didn't understand in the TV show you're currently watching, but not as the end-all be-all of language learning. Now, if you like textbooks, I like taking notes, I go through textbooks for fun. Good for you, because that's a leg up, I guess, but it's not for everyone. It's not the most fun way to learn languages, so I don't recommend it. If you play video games, I think this tip 2, is really good because most games have subtitles in many languages, and they've been professionally translated and localized to match idioms and cultural norms in each language. It's especially helpful with games you're already familiar with to change the game language into your target language, because then you already have some background about how the game is played, the plot, what's going on, and then you get to see the target language used in scenarios you're already familiar with in your native language, so it just adds a bit of context, and then you can maybe have a better a better idea of what's going on, and maybe you pick up a bit more. Of course, this works for any game, though I wouldn't recommend anything too complicated right off the bat, but I found it to be really good practice to set Animal Crossing, at least for me, to either Spanish or Japanese. It's simple enough that you learn a lot of basic vocab, and anything you don't understand with words can probably be picked up from context, and also doesn't really matter that much, so you can just move on. But yeah, Animal Crossing is my go-to for trying to learn new languages. I really, really recommend it. Now, all this language input is really good because it gets you familiar with the way your target language is spoken or written, but unfortunately, you can't just absorb media and hope to become fluent. If input is half the story, then of course the other half is output. Which brings us to tip 3, write. Write as much as you can, write every day if possible, and sorry, I am going to be that person Typing does not count unless you're not physically capable of handwriting. I will die on this hill, but handwriting anything, notes for class, a shopping list, whatever, is way better for your recall than typing, as far as I'm concerned. Plus, it's an excuse to decorate a cute notebook and brush up on your penmanship. And maybe you like stickers. I'm that person, so I like to handwrite. Now, there are two ways that I like to write. One of them is sentence mining and the other is journaling. Sentence mining is a great tactic when you're just starting out because it's a bit unrealistic to just expect you to be able to just string sentences together from the get-go, especially when all you know is like, yes, no, my name is, how are you? Like, you're not gonna write a journal out of that. It's okay. Now, before I explain what sentence mining is, I do want to say that I'm fairly certain that other language learning videos use this phrase, sentence mining, differently than the way I'm about to use it, but it's my video, so I create the narrative. Let's take this screenshot from Animal Crossing as an example. With sentence mining, I'm basically going to break down this sentence in order to understand it better. First, I plug the sentence into Google Translate so that I can understand the meaning in my native language. From there, I identify the parts of speech, such as nouns, verbs, and adjectives, so that I'm better able to understand language patterns. I'm gonna get kind of linguistic-y for a second, but most, not all, but most languages have one sentence pattern that they always follow. Take the sentence, I eat pizza, in English. The order of the sentence is subject, which is I, verb, eat, and object, pizza. Subject, verb, object. So English tends to follow an SVO pattern, as does Spanish, by the way. In contrast, take the Japanese sentence, watashi wa pizza o tabemasu, which means the same thing, I eat pizza. The order is subject, watashi, object, pizza, and verb, tabemasu. So the pattern is subject, object, verb, instead of English's subject, verb, object. Once you begin to understand these patterns, it makes breaking down a sentence much easier, and eventually you'll be able to sentence mine whole paragraphs if you'd like. You don't have to, it's kind of a good beginner task because it's just sentences at a time. But to start, it doesn't even have to be a whole sentence. For example, when I'm reading at night, I highlight words that I don't know that I feel I should know because they appear so often, and look them up the next day to input into a flashcard website. This is another time where I have to recommend you something that's not so enjoyable, unless you're like me and you love flashcards and do them all the time. But yes, I really do think flashcards work if you're willing to put in the extra effort to make them and study them every day. I can't say it enough. Language learning as an adult takes a lot of motivation and a lot of setting up habits, and this is one of the habits that I like to do. I highly, highly recommend the website Anki because it spaces out the cards between days to train your long-term recall. So for example, you enter in a card on day 1, you get it, I think twice that day, and then if you say that it was a normal amount of difficulty, so it's hard, normal, easy, and if you miss it, you can say again, so you get the flashcard immediately. But if it's a normal amount of difficulty, you see it again in 3 days, and then let's say 6 days, 9 days, a month, 2 months, so that eventually you might only see a term every 4 months or something like that. But it really helps with long-term recall, as I said. The website is completely free to use. I've been using it religiously for the past 4 years, so yeah, I'm really into it. The second part of this tip is about journaling. This is a bit more advanced as far as writing goes, but as far as I'm concerned, even writing a single sentence counts as journaling. That's a win in my book. So you can start with a simple sentence like, today I, ... or this morning I ate, ... I'm very food oriented, so I like to write about what I ate. Write the sentence, look at your beautiful handwriting, and remind yourself that you weren't capable of writing that sentence a month ago. Clap for yourself. Over time, you can increase the amount you're writing, which will come naturally as you build up your vocabulary. Now, if you're willing to challenge yourself, here's something I do now. I've actually been using these tips a lot recently as I've been learning Norwegian, and one of the things I try to do regularly is journal. So this is what I do. First, you write a couple of sentences in your native language. In my case, I'm actually writing in Japanese since I'm comfortable with it, but still like to practice whenever possible. Once you've written the sentences, translate them one by one using software such as Google Translate. I hate AI in every shape and form, so I use Google Translate, not like ChatGPT, but whatever. I'm not gonna recommend you use ChatGPT because I hate it, but you get what I mean. I'm gonna move away from that now. When I do this, I like to set the audio to 50% speed and write notation on pronunciation, so I get the sense for how certain letters are pronounced. Norwegian is one of those languages for me as an English speaker that I see a vowel and I'm like, oh, that's an A, like the English A, and then you're like, oh, thank God I'm listening to this person speak it to me, because that is absolutely not right. Once you've done this with all of your sentences, identify 3 words that you're pretty sure you know the meaning of or think you can guess them, and add those to your mental vocab list or physical if you're using a program like Anki. Now, Norwegian is said to be one of the easiest languages for native English speakers to learn, so I do have a bit of an advantage in this particular example when it comes to guessing at cognates. Cognates, by the way, are words that exist in both your native and target languages that are essentially the same. I'll throw some up on screen right now because there are quite a few from English to Spanish or English to Japanese. That being said, did I understand every single part of this paragraph that I just journaled? No, I did not, and I'm not going to bash myself over the head trying to nail it down, because that's not fun, that's not a productive way to learn. Once again, I have to emphasize that it's okay to move on, even if you don't understand everything. In fact, you should move on instead of ruminating over a word or phrase that either you'll come to learn and understand naturally over time because you see it enough, or you just don't need to learn it because you don't ever see it. Something like that. So, that brings me to tip 4. Wow, this is a long video. I hope this is all helpful so far. Tip 4 is another obvious one, but here it is. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. In fact, you should make mistakes. I encourage making mistakes because that's how you learn. And, I'm not gonna lie, I'm the kind of person who lies awake at night thinking about that one time I said something wrong in Japanese, and I would never make that mistake again, and I wonder if my friend who I said that to laughs behind my back every time she thinks of me, even though that was 2 years ago, etc., etc. You know how it goes. I am a serial overthinker, especially when it comes to foreign language. So let me make it clear, nobody cares. Nobody cares if you make a mistake. You're learning and people get that, and they're gonna give you the benefit of the doubt. Honestly, if you're a chronic overthinker like me and you get highly embarrassed making mistakes, it's almost an advantage to make them because, oh man, I am never gonna make that mistake again because I am simply too embarrassed. On the flip side, have I ever thought about a conversation I had with someone in English and their native language was not English and they made a mistake? No, of course not, because the content of the conversation always matters more than any little grammatical tidbit that they might have messed up or their accent or anything like that. You just don't notice it when you're speaking to other people, I think. So you just gotta remember that mistakes happen and you move on, and the person you're talking to doesn't really care that much. I have to go back to the example of how a child learns a language. They make mistakes and they move on. The only difference is they haven't yet become ingrained with like a sense of shame, whereas we who are learning languages as adults sort of have, which probably speaks to a greater societal issue, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Now, you can probably already tell, but this tip is mostly aimed at learning to speak a language as opposed to reading or writing. It's a lot easier to edit yourself in writing, so mistakes, I think, are a lot less daunting, even though they do happen. It's when it comes time to actually speak to a native speaker that things can get kind of intimidating, and I do seriously mean a native speaker because I think even in an environment where you're learning language with other people, speaking with them is not as scary because they understand where you're coming from, what it's like to learn a language, whereas native speakers might not have that sort of background. And yes, you are going to have to speak to a native speaker at some point in time if you want to learn a language. I get it. The first time I ever went to Japan, I thought I was gonna die when the lady at the konbini asked me if I had a rewards card when I went up to pay for my bottle of tea. I was like, this is not how it is supposed to go. You're supposed to hit me with a Nihongo Jozu and then ask if I want the bottle in a bag, and then let me leave in triumph of clearing my first real life Japanese language interaction. But you know what? I got through it in the end, and every other time afterward when I had to go to the supermarket or town hall or whatever, it was only slightly scary the first time, and I was fine. So, yeah. I know it really depends Wow. I know it really depends on the country and situation, because I've definitely had people in Japan refuse to speak Japanese with me, even though my Japanese was better than their English. It just happens sometimes, you just gotta get over it. But the vast majority of people are willing to help you learn, and they're more likely to appreciate the effort of you trying to interact in their native language, rather than worrying about, if you messed up the gender of the adjective or something like that. They just like that you're putting in the effort, I think. Being a white American, I feel really strongly about this because, I feel like people in my generation, but demographic for sure, either don't care or aren't incentivized to learn a new language, and you just miss out on a lot. The friends you're able to make, the experiences you're able to have, when you're able to put yourself out there and just try speaking in a foreign language, I think those experiences far outweigh any fear that the possibility of making mistakes can cause. One final word of advice that I have for fearing mistakes / speaking in foreign language is you gotta adapt the mindset of, I'm the best to ever do it. I do this with sports and languages sometimes. Let me tell you, I do a martial art. It's a Japanese martial art called Kendo. It's like fencing but Japanese. And when I see that I'm at a competition and the person across from me is a 6 foot tall, fully grown man, I just have to tell myself I'm the best to ever do it. I pretend I'm a frat boy who's about to go into finance, who's never had a problem in his life. He thinks he's on top of the world. And I just get in that ring and I go. Does it always go well for me? No. But the fact that I'm able to get in the ring and tell myself I'm the best to ever do it is important. So yes, I know I'm in fact not the best to ever do it. But if you have low self-confidence or you're afraid to do something, this is so helpful. Don't worry that you're gonna mess up X or Y. Just do it and be like, wow, I am so good at this. It sounds stupid, I know, but honestly, it is so helpful to give yourself this weird confidence boost, especially when you're going into a situation you're kind of afraid of or stressed about. Of course, that doesn't mean that you don't have to remind yourself that you could always learn more, because yes, there is always more to learn. So be the best to ever do it, but also remind yourself that you could be better, I guess. Now we're on the last tip. I hope the previous 4 have been helpful and you're feeling motivated. This tip is similar to the previous one, and it's this: be kind to yourself. Language learning, especially self-studying, which is more or less what this video is about, is hard. It's difficult, can't lie. Just like any habit, it's going to be difficult to sit yourself down and try to study for X amount of minutes every day so that eventually it just feels like a natural part of your schedule. And side note, when I say study, what I really mean is journal or read a children's book or listen to a podcast in your target language or any of those things I recommended in the earlier tips. Maybe your first 2 weeks will go really well. You'll study for 30 minutes each day, some days even longer, and feel like you want to do more because there's just so much you want to learn and so much you don't know. Then you have a really busy day and you just don't feel like studying. You just take that day off, and that day becomes 2, then 3, then a week. That's okay, so long as you do one thing: come back. Progress is not linear. Unless you're highly dedicated or have an insane amount of free time, you shouldn't expect yourself to sit down every day and study without ever missing a day. That's unrealistic and honestly puts a lot of stress on yourself. I have a mindset that I use with art and with language learning that it should never feel like work. Is it difficult some days? Absolutely. But do I dread sitting down at my desk to do it? Well, if I do, then I should absolutely take that day off, because it's still a hobby at the end of the day. I still want to enjoy it. Progress isn't linear, you're not a robot, and you deserve breaks. So yes, study as much as you want to and as much as you can, but remember that it's not the end of the world if you miss a day or a week or even 2. The important part is that no matter how slow your progress is, it's still progress. You're still getting better, and that's what matters. Which brings me to another point, which is to set reference points. God, I sound like my high school psych teacher who I kind of hated. But she was right about this. Let's say you've been studying Spanish for 2 years, and you're feeling like you've just kind of hit a plateau, you don't think you're getting better. Look back at materials from 6 months, a year, or a year and a half. It can be anything. Journal entries you made, books you were reading, old podcast episodes you listened to. You'll likely notice either A, how much easier it is to understand that piece of media, or B, how much better you've gotten at writing or spelling or conjugating verbs, whatever. I finished a Japanese horror novel recently, and partway through reading it, I realized that there were a lot of parts I would have had trouble understanding a year or maybe even 6 months ago. Kanji is just hard like that. Side note on Japanese, with kanji, if you don't know it, you can't guess it with context. You just gotta move on. Regardless. So you might not notice it because progress is incremental, but you really do get better over time, and it can help you to remind yourself of that so that you do realize that in fact you've made progress. I think that's all I want to say on this tip, so yeah, it's very short, but be kind to yourself. And that brings me to the end of the video. Once again, the 5 tips are: 1. Set achievable goals, both big and small. 2. Consume as much media as you can in your target language. 3. Write so much. You can journal, you can sentence mine, whatever, just write. 4. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, it happens. Just gotta move on. And 5. Be kind to yourself. I hope these tips are helpful to you and that everything made sense, or a little bit of sense at least. I've never made a video like this, one so long and one about language learning, nor have I really put my thoughts about language learning onto a page. So I think I at least learned some things about myself and my own process. Throughout this video, I tried to put up as many resources as I could when it comes to media I enjoy, or books I'd recommend, or podcasts, things like that. But please do comment if you have any questions along that line, or honestly any questions in general, but especially book recommendations, please. I love talking about books, especially fantasy books. If you want a fantasy book recommendation in English or Spanish or Japanese, I got you. Or horror. I also got horror. But yeah, that's all I got. I hope this was helpful. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in another video. Bye!